Welcome to today's session, which is called Preparing for Success, and this video was made and recorded in November 2024, and all information was accurate at the time of recording. This video is aimed specifically at students that are studying the English Literature B course with AQA, which is now coming up to its 10th anniversary. The aim of this video is to give you insights from the perspective of the exam board and also the perspective of an examiner in terms of giving you tips to how to succeed. I will also go through the pitfalls that you should avoid because those pitfalls can have a negative impact on your marks. I will also demystify some misconceptions about the specification and what is required to do well. And I will aim to focus your attention on what matters in terms of how to get good marks. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about English generally, particularly how it's marked, because it is what it is. It's a very subjective subject, and there are numerous ways that students can actually write essays because of just the nature of the course. However, regardless of this amount of choice, there are common things that students need to do in order to succeed, and sometimes for whatever reason they don't do them, and that will have a detrimental impact on the marks that they receive. In terms of my channel, I've explained in previous videos such as these that I've been an examiner for AQA now for years, and I've taught this spec right from the beginning. So I've already uploaded onto my channel 4 videos which have links to some of the things I'll be talking about in this video. There's a video about how to quote evidence effectively, both for GCSE and A-level. There is a video about the problems with writing frames, particularly for A-level, which can come across as quite restrictive. A recent video that I've recorded is important information for students, and that is following recent guidance from examiner reports for Literature B. And perhaps my most popular video out of all of these is the video Top Right, which is 15 top tips from an examiner, and I did that video now about 6 months ago. Pleasingly, none of the things that I have been saying in these videos have been inaccurate, because the exam board recently has repeated what I've been saying for years. So I would like you to think that these videos are coming from a credible source. So with this video in addition as well, there is plenty of information on my channel specifically towards Literature B and what to do to be successful. So the first thing I want to discuss with you is what you should do as a student before you start writing your essays. So, as expressed in previous videos about Literature B, students should focus exclusively on the question that is set. So all of the questions, regardless of whether it's comedy or tragedy or political and social protest or crime writing, you will be asked about something specific. And if you are being asked about something specific, then you should talk about it. For example, on the right-hand side here, I have given you 6 examples, 3 of them from the political and social protest paper, and 3 of them from the comedy paper. And you can see that I've highlighted in bold what the focus of the question is. So in that first example, you need to talk about bullying. Second example, you need to talk about conflict, and so on. So these questions will be specifically written with a very specific focus. You need to answer the question and talk about exactly what the topic of the question is. Okay. For extract-based tasks, you need to make sure that the extract is the focus of your answer. There's a reason why they've given you an extract. It's because they essentially want you to zoom into it and to show off really your analytical skills when you're dealing with a set amount of text given. Okay, so for section A tasks, really important that you really do zoom into that extract and you really talk about it in a lot of detail. You need to make sure that before you start writing, that you highlight the focus or the subject of the question, as I have done there in that blue box. If I was a student studying this course, the first thing that I would want to do is figure out exactly what I'm being asked to talk about. The analogy that I have given students recently is very simple. Imagine that it's Tuesday and I ask one of my students, what did you do at the weekend? And one of my students replies and tells me something that they did on Monday. They're not answering the question, because the weekend is Saturday and Sunday. And it's that same analogy that Literature B employs, which is if you're being asked about happiness, then you need to talk about happiness. And it's as simple as that. Also, and this is I would hope pretty obvious with this kind of course, which is you need to know the text very well to make good choices. So in other words, which bits of the text are you going to use to discuss the topic or the subject of the task? So if you're being asked about deception for comedy, for example, then you need to know the text well enough to find maybe 1 or 2 examples of deception in the text. And you can only do that, and you can only select those textual moments if you know the text very well. Okay? It is simply common sense that in order to do well with English literature, you need to know the text that you're talking about. And you have plenty of time to do this. A levels are 2 years long, but even if you're doing AS levels, that's a year, an academic year, you've got more than enough time there to reread the text, to do chapter summaries, to zoom into the text and make sure you appreciate the plot, the characters, and what is actually happening in the text. So that's before you start writing your essays. So what about when you are writing your essays? Okay, so what should you bear in mind? So you should not write about something that hasn't been asked about. So as in those examples I've just showed you, you're being asked specifically for comedy in that practice question about deception. I would not expect students to be talking about something different, like happiness, because that is not the focus of the question. So questions are written with the assumption that such a topic, theme, or element or aspect are present in the text. So what students shouldn't do is say, oh, there isn't any happiness in the task, there isn't any deception in the task, because that's untrue. And if you were to argue that, you would be marked as being inaccurate, which means that you wouldn't accrue many marks at all. So the questions are written assuming that that topic or that subject is in the text. You need to find it and talk about 1 or 2 examples of it. You have to remember that you are writing for a certain amount of time. And if you think of the section C answers, you're writing about 2 texts in about 50 to 60 minutes, which means you're roughly going to be talking about each text for 20 to 25 minutes. That's not a lot of time. So when you have such a restriction on the amount of time, you need to focus on what is most relevant. I will come back to that a bit later. When you're writing your essays, you should also avoid writing in a general way about context. You do not need to include information about a writer's autobiography unless it's really relevant to the answer of the task. You should not be making comments on society of the day, about literary theory, about critics. It doesn't often work very well and it distracts you from the focus of the task. So we don't want you, for example, if you're doing The Handmaid's Tale, to write a whole paragraph about Ronald Reagan's autobiography. Or if you're doing Blake's poetry, we don't need a paragraph about the French Revolution. It's unnecessary because it detracts from the question that's being asked. So avoid, going into a lot of detail regarding context. Okay, AO3 is not just about historical periods. There are other ways to get AO3. So you shouldn't have to shoehorn in or force into your essay lots of context. It detracts from the focus of the task. In this specification, the mark scheme does not take marks away from you. You would never lose marks for writing something if it has no credit, but you wouldn't gain marks either. And I have been in situations when I've asked for my students' scripts back because I'm suspicious of the mark, and they've always been marked accurately. But a student hasn't done as well because they have written a whole paragraph and not got any marks at all. So essentially they've been writing for 15 minutes, but because it's unnecessary, they get nothing. So when time is as precious as this, you really want to make sure that every sentence you say is to do with the question and the focus of the question that you have been asked. AO5 is always the assessment objective which underpins and unifies this specification, because it's to do with your answering of the task, discussion, interpretation. That's why AO5 is always listed first in mark schemes with the bullet points. That is what is driving this whole course, and that will be automatic if you know the text very well and you're answering the question at hand. Okay? AO5 is not about critics, and it's not about literary theory. Again, those are two things that distract students away from their own voice, and I have always said that students that do well have an effortless approach in their voice. They have a strong, confident voice about the text that they're discussing, are unwavering in their interpretations or discussion. Finally, linking to that point, you need to make sure that you write with confidence, with sharpness of mind, with enthusiasm and assuredness, and I'll come back to that issue of assuredness a bit later. So that is what you should bear in mind when you are writing. Okay. Paper 2, whether it's crime or whether it's political and social protest for Lit B, will be open book. And I know by doing political and social protest that students' desks are full of books for this exam. But the question is, how do you do paper 2 open book exam effectively? So one of the pieces of advice that I would give, which is also echoed by the exam board, is making sure that even if it's not answering the question, that you are physically working with the book in your hands to be able to have a focus of the question and find the right parts of the text quickly, because that's exactly what you would be doing in the exam. So it's anticipated with open book exams that you will use detailed textual support, and that you will make specific, accurate and regular references. Regular because you've got the text. There is really no excuse for not referring to the text frequently. Usually, students will quote less for paper 1 because they don't have the text with them, and will quote more frequently for paper 2, or that's what they are supposed to do, let's say. So you have the text with you, you've got everything you need. There is no reason why you should not be quoting accurately and specifically. Because the texts are with you, there is not such a heavy burden placed on your memory and remembering evidence. And I've always said to students that for paper 2 specifically, you don't really need to revise key quotes as such. You just need to know the story and where to find those quotes, so you are working with the right information if you need it. So where to find the information is important. What are the pivotal moments in the story or the text? What are the girders or the joists of the text which you could refer to in relation to a specific task? Open book exams does not mean less revision, so please don't be complacent. You're not being given the text because it means you have to work less hard for them. You're being given the text to quote more frequently from them and to enhance your comments on authorial or dramatic methods. So you should still be revising a lot, even for an open book exam. Okay, and because the texts, some of them are obviously 80 to 150,000 words long, maybe even longer, I'm not sure, but whatever the length of the text, you shouldn't be wasting time looking for quotations, because it can be like looking for a needle in a haystack, particularly if you don't know the text as well. So you need to know where things happen in the text rather than specifically where the quote is, because that can waste time. So that slide is specifically for paper 2 there. I'm just going to finish this presentation with some quotes from myself. So these are things that I often say to students in my lessons when I'm preparing them for their exams, which is students do far better when they focus on the topic subject to the tasks and use well-chosen moments from their text to discuss that topic or moment. Sound knowledge of the text is therefore paramount. This idea being that you circle or underline the topic of the task, you know exactly what the examiner is asking you about, and you then go over to your text and find parts of the text to talk about. Okay, so that's really important, and you can only do that well if you know the text well. Okay. Second thing, Students should remember that they only have 20 to 25 minutes to write about each text for section C, so students need to be judicious and selective about the moments of the text they will use, and try not to talk about too much. Assuredness, therefore, can come from what to leave out, what to prioritise and select. Students for paper 2 are not expected to write solidly for 3 hours, as the extra half an hour is for reading time. Students will not be able to write about everything they may wish to, as the time will not allow this, so students must resist the scattergun approach and the temptation to write about several examples. As an examiner, I notice sometimes that students try and talk about too much in the time. They give me 10 examples of something, and it's too much because it's actually just too listy. They're not analysing or discussing, they're just listing things. So you can't bite off more than you can chew. Doing less better is far better than doing a lot badly, okay? So 2 examples for section C at the most for each text about your topic is more than enough, providing that you're going to be talking about it in a perceptive and thorough way. So don't feel overburdened with the amount of examples you want to talk about, okay? Next, often a student will have memorised an often lengthy piece of literary criticism about a text and will go into their exam determined to use it in their essay. This is not the right way to go about it, as the criticism is often irrelevant and distracts the student away from the task at hand. Okay, so I've seen this several times in exams, that students will have gone into that exam and memorised something that Joe Smith has said about a text, and regardless of what the question is, they will try and put it in their essay. But because they're forcing it into their essay, regardless of the focus of the task, it doesn't work very well. It just seems thrown in. It doesn't come across as, I suppose, perceptive. It doesn't come across as very coherent. So you need to resist that temptation to memorise literary criticism and be determined to throw it in. It doesn't work very well at all. And it also takes time. It takes time to memorise these literary critics' quotes. So don't do it, okay? My students have never done it, and they've been absolutely fine. It's just one extra thing that burdens students sometimes, and it doesn't often work well at all. Finally, the last tip that I'm going to give you from myself is students should not make generalised assumptions about the readers or audiences of yesteryear. Often students will rely on making statements such as a Shakespearean audience would have been shocked by, or women in the audience would have felt, which apart from being inaccurate, adds little to the credibility of the student's answer. So this is really important. Again, some students will fall back on making these generalised statements, which are often untrue. So I know, for example, from teaching The Taming of the Shrew, which is Shakespeare, students will often say the audience would have been shocked by the level of sexual innuendo in the play. No, they wouldn't. Where are you getting that from? Why are you suggesting that people of the past are somehow prim and proper? They were just like us. Breaking news, they also had sex. Okay, so they couldn't have been that disgusted by it if they were having sex, as we all do. Okay, so it's a wrong thing to say. Okay, again, to suggest that all women would have felt the same way is too oversimplistic. It's not true. Where is your evidence to suggest that every single woman who would have read this particular text would have been offended? That's not true, and it's too simple. And because it's inaccurate and because it's not credible, don't say it. It doesn't do anything for your answer. It does not gain you any marks. I think students think that it's getting them context for AO3. It isn't. It's too inaccurate for that. Okay, so avoid making these kind of oversimplistic statements. They don't work. Okay, so the aim of this video was to give you some tips from a perspective of an examiner of what to do and what not to do. I've tried to make it as clear as I possibly can that this has always been the case. So this has always been the case for the last 10 years. Nothing has changed in Lit B. It's always been the same. Okay, so it's sometimes, I suppose, disheartening that despite this course now being a decade old, that students are still falling into the same pitfalls. Okay, so I want to make it clear that this is accurate. Okay, so don't do it if it's not going to work. All right, so thank you very much for watching, and good luck in your studies, and stay tuned for further videos. Thank you.